without compromising your morals, just agreeing to disagree?
That's a good question. I thought about it the other day. Older generations, we can kind of get stubborn, and our values become more serious. I think the trend here is common ground, finding some common ground with young people. And during my teaching of 20 years, I found that it was hard to relate to some of the students early on in my teaching career. And what I decided to do, I said, okay, let me find something, a common ground. And after talking to them, one of the things I found out was that these kids do value succeeding, and they're innovative, and we don't want to stifle that. I mean, every generation has that, whether it's fashion. We push the limits on fashion, music, language. So you're going to get that. So I think the older generation has to admit that even when they were younger, that they did that also. So find that common ground, redirect these young people, and be patient.
Mr. Walker, do you agree with this?
Well, what I wanted to say was I'm lucky because I'm in touch to some extent with the younger generation. My son, some of you may know Clay Walker, he's the Director of Juvenile Services here in Caddo Parish. And he constantly gives me information about the younger generation. One of the problems that I see is, for example, I don't know how many folks have been to Memphis to see the Civil Rights Museum there, but it is astonishing, and it will knock you back. And I don't know that ours here relates to one of the more important things that we don't seem to understand is Black history. The main thing you need to do is get white people to pay attention. And you can't do that until you show them not just the Black history of the Civil Rights era, but the horror that came down before that. The history of Shreveport after the Civil War, the slaughterhouse of Blacks, 400 a week. It was a nightmare. And that has prevailed and come down through our city into the era of George Dartois. How many young people even know who that is? And he reigned over this city with a reign of terror that you could not imagine. I sued him 17 times. Never lost to him because he wasn't bright. But he also scared me to death. And if he scared me, I can't imagine what Black folks thought in that time period. And so it's been difficult for us to come forward and be more loud when we see things. When we see, for example, remember the kid that was shot because they thought his cell phone was a pistol? Remember that? Well, I have seen the tape from Channel 3, which shows that the police officer had him from behind by the shoulders with both hands. And the kid's in front of the officer, and he's holding up this cell phone, not 24 inches from that cop's eyes. And when he broke loose and ran off from me to the television camera, with the camera there, they just shot him dead. And then the DA said, well, we can't, there's nothing to indict on. The hell do you mean nothing to indict on? Look at the tape. One of the things that I'm worried about also is you don't have to have a riot to be angry. And to come forward and say, if you think Black Lives Matter, then raise hell about this. You have to do that, and that's what happened in Shreveport. That's how we got rid of Dartois. Anyway, that history is lost on the younger generation because we don't tell them about it, and they may or may not listen until they see that it's how important it is in making their lives go forward together. Thanks.
And Bree, following up with that, obviously we have the Black Lives Matter, as Mr. Walker just said. We didn't have Black Lives Matter, the movement, back in the day when our grandparents were stomping the grounds. Just following up that question, do you agree with what's been said so far?
I definitely do agree. I think the older generation and the younger generation have to understand the differences. So our younger generation, they're very passionate and they're very energetic. So when you have campaigns and things that come up like Black Lives Matter, they need some guidance. The older generation should teach the younger generation. That's a very profound principle that we need to keep in mind. Young people, they need relationships. You have to show you care. You have to show that you have an interest in the things that they have. So when they're on the front lines for a Black Lives Matter campaign, yes, it may go into riots and things like that. If we do not have the older generation step up and say, you know what, we've been there, we've marched, we went through the civil rights movement, we have a little experience, so let me team up with your passion and your energy so that we can be effective, so that we can actually make a difference. And I think realizing those differences with that passion and that energy, with that wisdom, if we can bridge that gap, then I think we can go a very long way.
It's a lot that's already been said, but I think a big piece of it really just starts at home. We're sending so many of our kids to be educated and taught by a teacher for 8 hours a day, yet they come home and they're not learning about the history that they talked about. I tease my dad. He grew up with Jesus. My dad grew up in a time where you couldn't walk down the street after a certain time. You had to go to the back of a restaurant to get your food. Reckless eyeballing. There was a ton of things that he's exposed me to. Neighborhoods you couldn't even go in. You couldn't go to certain pools, different water fountains. And our kids just don't, they just don't see that now. I didn't either, but I was taught at home. So I wasn't relying on a biased history book or a teacher at school or even the community to tell me what the older generation went through. I learned that from my father. So I think starting to help bridge the gap between young and old, I think it starts at the home. So if your grandkids, while they're young, I think the older generation needs to, instead of sitting down watching SpongeBob, maybe we can sit down and watch some things that are educational about our past, about our history. So when that kid goes out into the world, they're educated about what used to be and may help them adapt a little bit better.
Thank you. I'm sitting here looking at this question, and I'm thinking, I was brainstorming as everybody was talking before me, and the question is saying, how does the older generation relate to the new generation without compromising their values? It's suggesting that these values are somehow being used as a barrier to prevent bridging this generational gap between the old and the new. And if that is so, I'm compelled to want to examine exactly and precisely what these values are. Because what I'm thinking is that, there are values that transcend all generations. They're equally adopted, they're being accepted, they're being practiced right now. So we can't be talking about that. So it must be something else. And if it is something else, if it's something that has been passed down through history, through tradition, through whatever experiences that the older generation may have had, then they need to be evaluated in the context of that, but also at the same time in the context of the younger generation. Therefore, in this day and time, they may need to be redefined. It seems to me that the goal, when I'm looking at this question here, the goal should be for the older generation, to whom are right now at the forefront of leadership, to be at the same time preparing the younger generation to enter the realms of leadership. Okay, and when you think about that, and when you think about what that means that if we allow our youth, whom happens to be our future, if we allow their lives to be squandered, then the race itself, the black race itself, has co-signed itself to a certain socio-economic, political, and educational death in the future by not doing so. So this means the ultimate burden then will be on the older generation to reach out and engage these young people. Okay? They need to do that by preparing them, by nurturing them, by educating them, by providing opportunities for them and avenues for them to ascend to the forefront of leadership when the older generation, by voluntarily or through the natural order of things, will have to exit. And it'll be a crime shame to let your knowledge and all your experiences die with you. Thank you.
All right, very good discussion there. Do you guys agree with that? So it seems like the older generation should possibly step up to the plate from your response. Felicia, how do you bridge the gap when the level of respect and appreciation for the older generation is almost extinct with the next generation?
Well, in my opinion, it goes back to respect. First of all, respect and learning to honor your elderly people. It all starts at home. If we could some kind of way, and the gap the thing that's missing, which is pretty much the gap, is love. If you don't have any love for yourself, then you're not gonna love and respect other people. So, in my opinion, it's gonna start with, the respect is gonna start with loving yourself and loving others. And then I think once we begin to love more, then we'll begin to bridge that gap.
I agree with Ms. Felicia. A lot of what we say is gonna be in the same retrospect, but the older generation, in my opinion, has to give the younger generation something to respect. A lot of what I see here, it begins at home, and it depends on what they were taught and those things that they may have, their parents may have missed the mark on. So I believe persistence and consistency and patience with the younger generation is going to be key to the success of bridging the gap between the older generation and the younger generation. We also have to educate our children these days on the things that I may have experienced, or the things that my grandparents and parents may have experienced in the past. If they don't know what happened, then they're not even concerned about why things are the way they are, why the older generation views the younger generation the way that they do. So just educating the younger generation, the older generation understanding that times have changed and that they need to be patient with our younger people.
Two things I thought about on that question was leading by example, older generation, and also mentoring. When we say lead by example, the people in here over 40, I guess I'm calling folks out. What are we talking about? Because young people are paying attention. What are we talking about as they are paying attention to us? What is our value system? Do we have this attitude of win at all costs? I mean, young people are looking at that. And, I got friends that are my age, and I can see some of that in them. So young people are mimicking that behavior. Do we value fair play? These things are almost extinct now. I think the society we live in pushes a lot of people to forget about those common courtesies. So lead by respond. The big thing, young people are looking for an opportunity to excel. And you say, look, you're interested, this is how you want to do it, let me show you how to do it. So I'm always mindful of that. And I get excited when a young person comes to me and said, then they'll say, Mr. Smith, what I need to do what you're doing.
Thank you.
One of the best ways, it seems to me, to get across the hill of a past president of the State Criminal Defense Bar. And so I have seen up close what that book is talking about are three caste systems throughout our history. The first was slavery. Here comes the Civil War. Slavery was no good, and so the white community goes, oh Lord, how are we going to keep black folks down? I know, we'll start Jim Crow laws. And that horror lasted up until right now, almost. And then after that, most of those laws were struck down as unconstitutional. What's the next thing we got to do? Lock folks up and keep black folks locked up as long as we can, and if they get out, try to do something to get them back in. Caddo Parish leads the entire planet in the number of people we lock up. Per capita, we lead the whole world. If Caddo Parish were a country, we lead the entire planet in the number of folks we lock up. And until black folks start, especially older people, start to understand how the police department is arresting young black men for things that they wouldn't dare arrest young white men for. Like crossing the street in the middle of the block, you're supposed to go to the corner. What? But that's the law, so that gives them the right to arrest. They don't do that to white kids, not ever. And on the other hand, the police say, well, we do that because that's what the black community wants, to get drugs off the street. How you do that is important, and they don't see that. And so we need to talk about those realities in Shreveport that exist right now, or we will never bring young and old together.
I want you to repeat that statistic. So in Caddo Parish, what is the statistic again?
We lead the entire world in the number of people per capita that we lock up, more than anywhere else,
Right here in Caddo Parish.
right here in Caddo Parish. And Caddo Parish leads the state leads the nation leads the world. We have 5% of the world's population, but we have 25% of its inmates in jail. And the vast majority are young African-American males. And once you get that marijuana conviction, you'll never get over it. You won't work the rest of your life. If you don't think so, take a look at what that looks like out there in the community. Nightmare.
The name of that book again, if anybody wants to know, repeat that for me.
The New Jim Crow by Michelle Alexander. She teaches at Stanford. She knows what she's talking about, and it's stunning. You have to read it, you go, oh God, I thought I knew a lot. I didn't.
Thank you. All right, Bree?
Speaking on the injustices that are going on in Caddo and in the Shreveport area, I think for this question, it really goes back to the root of them. That level of disrespect may have been something that has come in due to maybe lack of home training or lack of involvement. Well, why are parents not as involved in the child's life? That can be an economical issue. So I think what we need to do collectively is look at the root of this disrespect. Not understanding their history, not understanding these social injustices. Get these young people involved in seeing the process, have them read these books. Educating them may be a key to changing their disrespectful attitudes. If you're noticing that it may be something from home training, well, what child are you investing into? And I'm speaking to myself as well. What child outside of my own am I taking the time to invest into, because I see that the background behind that disrespect, and stop putting off our African American children just because they seem to be disrespectful. If we do not look at the root of these issues, then we will never be effective in bridging the gap.
Thank you, Bree. And if you guys can just reintroduce yourselves for the people just coming in just briefly and go from there.
Again, my name is Quentin Harris. Work in New York Life here in Shreveport. Also a member of the board member of the African American Chamber here. We were talking about respect. I don't think I've ever met a disrespectful child. And when I say that, I mean being disrespectful is a learned behavior. No one is naturally disrespectful without any guidance. So children that are going to school or going out into the community that are disrespecting, I guess, the generation before them, someone's not telling them that that's not okay. Someone's not informing them that that's not how you show respect or reverence to the generation that came before you. And I think a big piece of that is it's difficult for you to raise a child when you're 16. It's hard for you to be an effective parent when you're just graduating high school. So I know for me, I mean, maybe everybody else is here is pure as a wind driven snow, but I know I didn't mature until I was middle in college and getting out of college. So I didn't know where I was until I was really an adult. So it's very difficult for me to teach a child how to be respectful and not gossip and not be messy and not be hateful. All the little things that we actually overlook in society. We talk about education, we talk about being successful, but very seldom do I see people actually working on the character of children. And that child is growing up in a home where they see you being disrespectful to people that you don't care for. They see you cursing, they see you drinking, they see you doing all the things that you wish your child wouldn't do. How can we really expect them to do anything different? So the answer to the question I would say is we need to take a look in the mirror and fix us. Before we bring another life form into this world, you can't duplicate something that you don't have. So if you look at your child and that child is 8, 9, 10 years old and you're thinking, what in the world is wrong with that child? Go to the bathroom and look in the mirror.
Thank you.
Introduce yourself, Mark.
Yes, my name is Frederick Ellis. I'm a healthcare professional here and also assistant professor at Southern University in Allied Health and owner of Precise Health Group. I'm going to just read the question again so I can get it in my brain. They said, how do you bridge the gap when the level of respect and appreciation for the older generation is almost extinct with the new generation? And so when I think about that question, it basically, they're absolutely right, the two that just went before me. You got to think about the breeding ground and the foundation in which this is being produced. And we're talking about the environment, we're talking about the household. You have to start there. You can't put a Band-Aid on a bleeding artery and think you're going to save somebody's life. So we have to have radical change as far as in the environment and the household is concerned. I was listening to the gentleman earlier when he was given an economic report card about the state of black economics here in Shreveport, and it's definitely applicable to a lot of these things that are being produced in the household and the environment when a lot of these people are living in abject poverty, crime-ridden neighborhoods due to the lack of opportunity, the poor schools, poor education. All these things are producing that sentiment. Because that, like he said, that's a learned behavior. You don't come out of the womb disrespecting your elders. So all those things are producing this new product as this child is being grown up in that environment. So us older generation, us whom have that are standing on the shoulders of people that pushed us along, we have a responsibility to reach back into those environments, into those children, and impact those lives in any ways we can. Politicians need to start to create policies that, like the brother was giving the piss poor report card, we need to change that. We got to go from an F to at least a B, people, and that will start the process of these parents coming home feeling better about themselves. Maybe they'll be able to impact their child a little bit better when they can will not look in the mirror and be ashamed of themselves. So we got to start there.
All right, that was some good discussion. And audience, help us out on this. We had some good discussion from our panel. Do you agree with everybody? Do we have any questions or comments from the audience? And if you can grab this mic for me, or we need you to give us your first and your last name and go from there.
My name is Samuel Harrison, and what the young man said right here really struck a nerve with me, because I don't care what generation you're in, character is extremely important. Every generation has its woes and its wars. You said something very, very important. Values doesn't change. I don't care what generation you're in. However, what we are encountering is, just like you said, it's not going to work. So we know we have a problem. I've been going into schools, into the Bossier schools. There is no black representation in those schools. The children do not have anyone to look up to. I mean, there's not a presence. They have you, this distinguished panel. Mr. Walker struck a nerve as well. However, people are actually going in and sitting with those kids and saying to them, you're smart. You can do this. If you do not have character, it does not matter how smart you are. You're not going to advance. It's not going to work. So, I raised my kids here in Caddo. I'm from Memphis, Tennessee. I raised my kids here. I taught at Southern as well. I was on the invasive cardiovascular technology program for 6 years. I'm an invasive specialist. I diagnose heart disease. I'm not a doctor. I'm a technologist that works with cardiologists. And I'm telling you, people perish for lack of knowledge. When we get people to realize that you can do something, they become unstoppable. Just like I had to prove to myself, you have to prove to yourself. You can be an average student in high school, and you can be a 4.0 student in college. It's different. But if you, just like I've learned, I was at the Bossier Russian Middle School, talking to the principal, Mrs. Madden. If a child says, I want to play basketball, and you are 15 years old and you're in the 8th grade, well, guess what? Time is running out for you. You won't even get to go to college, because your time is going to run out. Nobody's going to recognize you. You may have the skills of Michael Jordan, but if your character is bad, you won't even get the chance.
All right. Thank you very much. Any rebuttal to that? One more statement? Bradford. State your first and your last name for people who are not familiar with you.
Good morning. My name is Willie Bradford. I'm chair of the Shreveport City Council, but more importantly, I'm a product of the things that we're talking about as it relates to bridging the gap. I can argue with everybody on this stage about their response, because I think we are not broad enough in what we are responding to. In reality, the development of our young people is not as simple as that. We got a generation now that we left behind. And we're talking about a situation where, and the statistics point them out, that we are at least 3 generations that we should have had a conversation as it relates to what the way we are framing it now, but that's not the way it is. Let me just say this. The home is not the home that you are thinking about. 75% of households are now a single parent. Wisdom used to be the forte of my generation. You got 35-year-old grandmothers. There's, somebody once said that gray hair brings wisdom. We got households now with grandmothers and grandfathers who doesn't have gray hair. So their life experiences does not afford them the wisdom to teach what we're talking about. So whose job is it? I became a member of the NWP in high school. Everybody here who's responding, and I ask this question, and I'm not being, at all critical, but I like to ask people, what have you done to help and assist in the situation that we are projecting or we're proposing that are solutions? We have to make ourselves available to get in the game. We have to also make young people available. We can't get people to volunteer for after school program. We can't get mentors. We can't get this guy right here. He and I got on a little debate on Facebook just 2 weeks ago, because I challenged him, because he said somebody ought to be doing this. I said, Brian, you somebody. And then he gave me a whole articulation of what he's involved in, and I appreciated that. What are you involved in? My final statement is this. Jeffrey Thomas said what Henry Walker said, and what the 2 things he said. We got, in Shreveport and Kettle Parish, we got 1% of procurements of $13 billion. Black folk, black businesses gain $2. Okay. Then we got the highest incarceration rate in Kettle Parish. The economic disparity is wide. So how do we expect, you don't see the correlation between no money and incarceration, hopelessness, despondency? That's what our new job is to do, is to lessen that gap, let people have a quality of life, income, that we can somewhat address the issues that are really affecting our communities. And then once we do that, then we can bridge the gap.
Thank you, Mr. Brown.
Very greatly. Thank you.
We're gonna have one rebuttal from, we're gonna do the audio. Quentin, you wanna do the rebuttal? Okay.
Ms. Bradford, let me respond to something that you said. I'm gonna be a little transparent here. I know I'm a little direct, a little bit more than I need to be sometimes, but my wife has a son, okay? His dad is a clown, all right?
Wow.
Yeah, and I say that with zero affection, all right? So for the last, well, let me take a step back. He was with us when we first got married, and she said I was too hard on him. So she sent him back to live with his father, because he's a little bit light. I got silence, excuse me for a second. So, and I told her before he left, he'll be back. I don't know what you think that boy is gonna be able to teach another boy. He's back with us now. Now, last year, I've been involved in some of everything. With the African American Chamber, I'm at all kind of events. I've seen probably 60–70% of the people in this room, some everywhere, okay? When he came back to live with us, I cut some of that short. So the question you asked was, what's actually happening? See, I think groups and organizations are great, but when I grew up, I didn't have an organization, I had a daddy. So since this boy has been back with me, he came back up here with C's and D's. Now he has A's and B's. I read the word with him, and I'm not telling you this for applause, I'm just telling you how I believe it should be done. I read the word with him every day. Not on Sundays when we go to church, not Wednesdays when we go to Bible study. We read the word every day. When you eat, you finish your homework, when you walk into this house, before you cut on the TV, game, phone, anything, let's get that word in. And once we do that, you can do whatever it is you want to do.
Thank you, Mr. Harris. I'm sorry, we're gonna be
Gotta
breaking
cut it
time.
short.
We're gonna go back to Mr. Walker, and we have one beautiful lady in the audience right here that's waiting patiently.
All I have is one quick thing to say in agreement with what was just said. As I told you, my son is the director of juvenile services, and he said that the biggest single factor in determining juvenile delinquency and pathway to prison is an absent father. It's the number one reason for kids acting out.
All right, and if you could say your first and your last name for the people who just came in.
My name is Fannie J. Carthon. I'm me and Carthon mother and the other 12. I get so tired of listening at people saying one parent home is the problem with children. That's a lie. I raised 13 children by myself. Every one of my children finished high school. Every one of them went to college. I have lawyers, and my baby's a lawyer. You see what Lynn doing, and the others, they all got good jobs. They teaching school, and they doing building houses. They contractors and everything. The worst thing let me go back and tell you. I worked on the district PTA board. I touched your life. You don't remember me at Piermont. I touched Henry's life. I used to keep his children in the spare time. I did 3 jobs. Miss Jacob is your mama, right? Okay. I used to go and spend months on vacation with them up on the East Coast. The worst thing that happened to our children when we took them out of our neighborhood schools. Our closing up our schools, demand the same education that was going on at Uri Drive, Capitol Street, all the other schools. I had a touch basis with the white children and the black children. I'm telling you, I didn't sit up in the house. You have to put them in church. You put the law first. Then you stand your ground. You do what you're supposed to do. You don't come in talking about people, oh this and oh that. All that rubbed off on the children. That's the worst thing happened to our children when we took them out and taught them white was better than black. We are all equal. I was taught equal. You can be whatever you want to do. My children get out of high school. I'm not going to college. Oh yes, you going to college. You're not going to sit up here. And every one of them went to college. So that's where the black people let it fail with their children. Took them out the neighborhood school and put them all across town. Now all our schools done closed up. I don't have nothing against white folk. Anybody. We are all equal in God our sight. And that's what we need to do. Stop rapping around the bush. Tell it like it is. You ain't getting to the message. You ain't getting the message. Tell it like it is. We are all equal. Okay.
Thank you for your comment. You look great. You deserve it. 12 kids. Awesome. I was so blessed to have both my grandmother, who was 91 when she passed, and my mother, 2 strong Leo women. My mother still, a whole entire life. We're going to wrap this up. We're to the end, and we're going to begin with Miss Felicia. One of our last questions is, how important is historical events relative to fostering a dialogue from an intergenerational perspective?
First, I would just like to add that I definitely agree with, Mr. Willie Bradford, and I will get back to the question next, I'm sorry, because with me, I'm not really a, test taker, or I'm not really good with these formal questions, so I do apologize. But I am a person that, I just believe in being real, and I believe in, getting out into the neighborhood, sometimes you can't dress up, sometimes you have to get out there with the young people. You have to show your face, you have to show what you're doing in your neighborhood and in the community. But to answer your question, I will say that historical events are very important because it teaches us young people what the older generation had to endure. It helps us to understand why the older generation think the way they think. It helps us to gain morals and values. And it also helps us to appreciate our culture. Mainly with God first, it should help us to build a foundation for our future events.
All right, and Candace, just reintroduce yourself for us.
Candace Adams, I'm a crisis coordinator and program director. I work day in and day out, 24 hours a day, some days, taking calls for people who are homicidal and suicidal and have environmental factors that affect their everyday lives and everyday decisions. Something that I constantly preach to the people that work underneath me is that you have to go into everything being considerate that somebody may have had the worst night ever. So that means when you approach these children in our neighborhood schools, when these teachers are talking to these children, take into consideration that this child may have had the worst morning ever. I see it every day. I see it in their cry out for attention. I see it in their cry out, whether it's positive or negative. They just want to be talked to. They want to be asked what's going on. They want to be reminded that they're important. They need to be encouraged. So that's something that I actually focus on every day. I'm like Ms. Walker with the textbook questions. I didn't do well with that in school, so just bear with me, but I am going to answer the question. I think it can only be successful because it says intergenerational perspective. That means events that all generations can participate in together. I think we can have more of that here in Shreveport. In my opinion, a lot of the events that happen don't include family, doesn't include multi-generational things. So if we can actually come together and come up with ideas that we can have events that everybody can come together and participate in and relate to. The older generation possibly giving some classes and giving some historical events about, to the younger generations, and the younger generations helping the older generation to understand how times have changed and what things we actually experience on the day-to-day lives.
Thank you, Ms. Adams. We have time for one more comment from one of our panelists. I don't have a quarter to do a coin toss, so let's see.
Okay, the question is how important the historical events relative to fostering a dialogue from an intergenerational perspective. Before I begin, I wanted to say, address something that Councilman Bradford said. He said something that was absolutely correct. It's about being accountable and asking, what have you done? And Mr. Bradford knows me very well. He's like a father figure of mine, but not too many other people know me here. But I want to make sure you know that, give you a little synopsis of what I do and what I've done. Throughout the 90s, with the help of Mr. Bradford, I self-financed the Ellis Foundation, which is a mentoring program which we try to address at-risk youth. I'm also a frontline HIV/AIDS activist. I do numerous speaking engagements all around the community and also surrounding parishes of Region 7 in regards to the dangers of HIV/AIDS. And every year I graduate at least 5 to 10 African-American, previously unemployed, raw individuals and transform them into healthcare professionals and give them a middle-class earning income when they was previously unemployed before they came to me as a raw student. So these are things that I do every single day. So I just don't know why to leave here thinking that I'm just up here talking for nothing. But the answer to the question is that how important is historical events relative to fostering dialogue from an generational perspective, well, it talks about history, you know, and that's the foundation. And when you think about history, we have to the re-education is the key for our young African Americans. They need to be re-educated. Even some of the older generation need to be re-educated in regards to our history. If you don't have a historical foundation of who you are, where you came from, those that preceded before you, then your future is going to be limited in the things you're going to be able to do. It all starts there, re-education.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ellis, and thank you guys so much for listening to this panel. We want to give them a round of applause. And that is the end of our discussion. Thank you very much. Mr. Fester Marshall is up next.
Okay, excuse me. Okay, now's the time for the breakout workshop sessions. The workshops are being held in the last two meeting rooms directly outside. In this room, we'll be having the legal and expungement workshops on any legal questions that you may have. We have an attorney on hand, so either you can stay here for the legal workshop or with Mary Jackson, or we have a professional networking. We have 20-minute meal prep for under $20 outside. We have credit repair, home buying, and financial budgeting and financial literacy workshops.